Hello, everyone. Hope all's well. My name is Peter Giardino. I'm the Senior Director of Strategic Accounts here at Virtuozzo. And we are here today to discuss our latest release of our Virtuozzo software technology, Virtuozzo 7. And hopefully that'll give you a good overview of our new solution and the ways in which you can use it to help grow your business. I'm not sure who knows who Virtuozzo is, but we were founded in 2001 as part of Parallels. And earlier this year, we were spun out of Odin Parallels and became our own entity. We are headquartered in Seattle and have offices in Moscow, London, and Munich. We have over 170 employees, including 100+ engineers working on the software technology. We have a network of 700 plus partners worldwide and over 5 million virtualized environments. So you can see a little bit of a snapshot of all of our partners that are listed there below. We are also a key contributor and sponsors to a number of different open source projects and technology partners. We're on the Open Container Initiative, OpenStack, and we have many strong technology alliances with a variety of different other partners that help us make our situation go forward. As you can see below, obviously Plesk and Odin are tight partnerships because they are part of the Parallels organization. But we've also formed other partnerships along the way: Elastic, cPanel, Docker, Kubernetes, and also Bitnami, and we can talk a little bit about that as we move along as well.
Thank you, Peter, for the introduction. So now begins the technical part proper. I will take the relay here and we'll talk in technical terms about Virtuozzo 7, our new product that we released just a couple of months ago. So the first section is just general introduction of Virtuozzo, what it is, the major components it is built of, etc. So on this slide, you can see a graphical representation of the three major components of Virtuozzo. Together, these components form a unique hyperverged virtualization integrated solution for service providers. So the components are, in the left top corner, you see system containers. System containers is what we started with some 15 years ago. So the first product that Virtuozzo did as a standalone company was system containers. At that time, we called them just containers, and system has been added only recently. Why have you added so this word system containers? Well, for the simple reason. We want to differentiate ourselves from Docker containers. Docker has gained a broad popularity recently, but their containers is, well, not what we call containers, so we had to differentiate. Docker is basically intended for DevOps, and they work with containerized processes, usually one process or a bunch of processes, but these processes has usually a pretty short lifetime, so lifespan. They are brought up, used, and then eliminated. So our containers are intended to be more like virtual machines. So just like normal virtualized operating systems that are used by end users on a consistent basis. So in years in a row, with persistent storage, with fully fledged operating system inside, etc. This is why we are now calling them system containers. So how are they different from virtual machines? Virtual machines are in the top right corner. they don't run any type of hypervisor to be fully functional. They only use the virtualization capabilities of the host operating system kernel, which is a Linux kernel, by the way. So there is no hypervisor, no virtual hardware is created inside system containers, no guest operating system is installed, because the guest operating system is essentially the same as the host operating system. Here I have to be more specific, not the operating system as the distribution, but the kernel. So the kernel can be only the Linux kernel inside containers. The operating system itself, meaning also the user space, the packages, can come from any distribution. It can be either an RPM-based distribution like Fedora, CentOS, Red Hat, or a Debian package distribution like Debian, Ubuntu. So all these operating systems can be run inside containers, but on a single Linux kernel. So if containers have the same capabilities as virtual machines, why use virtual machines at all? Well, for the simple reason that containers can't run Windows. So if a service provider needs to offer Windows to end users, they use virtual machines. We use the KVM hypervisor with certain optimizations for this. Now, where to install our virtualization solution and to run containers and VMs there? Well, of course, it is possible to install on a physical server with local storage. This has certain inconveniences, I would say, because local storage is likely to fail. And if an enterprise SAN solutions are used, they can be pretty expensive for an average service provider. So we have come up with a software-defined storage. So our Virtuozzo storage product unites the storage resources of a cluster of physical servers into a single storage cluster. So it is a distributed storage cluster, which is highly available. So if one server drops, fails, then storage is available on other nodes of the cluster, because we have multiple copies of every piece of data in the cluster. It is flexible. It is possible to create storage disks, virtual disks across physical nodes. For example, if the storage capacity of one physical server is not enough. And in general, it has all the capabilities of a hardware SAN appliance, but it sits purely in the software, and it is a good underlying layer for virtualization itself. So these are the three pieces which constitute Virtuozzo 7 as a product. Now on this scheme, it is visible, just the stack of different components is presented from bottom to top. This compute layer, so these are two top components from the previous slide. Storage is not considered here. So at the bottom, we're running just the Linux kernel within our own Linux distribution, which is called Virtuozzo Linux. The kernel that we took initially is 3.10, but the plus here indicates that all the recent additions to the kernel, to the 3.10 kernel, which make it 3.11, 12, etc., are also integrated into our kernel on a regular basis. But, well, the initial one was 3.10, so it is indicated here. It is not necessary with our product to reboot the physical server in order to install security updates. So with our ready kernel technology, all the security patches are applied to the kernel in runtime. So containers and virtual machines don't have to be stopped or suspended for this. The server doesn't have to be rebooted. Ready kernel is also Virtuozzo technology. On top of this kernel, we run containers and virtual machines, as was already mentioned. What main features do we have on top? So containers and virtual machines benefit from unified memory management. So if a virtual machine doesn't use its allocated amount of memory, we can take it and give to a container that requires it at the moment, for example. We have an application and image catalog, which I will talk about later. Well, for example, like some CMS or simple WordPress application can be sold by a service provider to its end users. That WordPress can come in the form of a container or a virtual machine, doesn't matter. High availability is made possible thanks to our storage, Virtuozzo storage. A server fails, all containers and virtual machines are moved automatically, transparently to the user to some other server in the cluster. Backups are unified, and the image format of a backup is the same for containers and virtual machines. Live migration is also possible thanks to the product backed up by Virtuozzo called CREW, Container Restoring User Space. It means that a container can be at will migrated from server to server without interruption to its services. So end users won't notice anything. Disk encryption is possible to make users, to make them not worry about their data in case a malicious user gets access to a virtual disk. So all the contents of a virtual disk can be encrypted, and without a key, it can be decrypted. Dynamic resource scheduling is increasing or decreasing vital container or virtual machine resources in real time. Those resources are CPUs, CPU power, memory, disk space, network limitations. Everything can be adjusted in real time, either decreased or increased, without restarting a container or a virtual machine. How can this be managed then? So we have two API interfaces to all this stuff. Our legacy API is Virtuozzo SDK. For example, Odin Automation for Cloud Infrastructure uses this API to manage Virtuozzo servers. We are gradually shifting towards the open source standard libvirt API, which is used, for example, by OpenStack. And with Virtuozzo 7, libvirt is already supported. With Virtuozzo 6, it was partly supported. Now it is fully supported. So Virtuozzo can be fully integrated with OpenStack. Of course, as libvirt develops further, more and more management capabilities will be available in OpenStack for Virtuozzo. Virtuozzo storage, so the third component of Virtuozzo. Why is it highly available, first of all? It is highly available because all the data exists not only within the bounds of a single physical server, but is spread across the storage cluster in such a way so that the loss of one or two physical servers will not make the data unavailable. The data will remain in any case, even if two servers or hard disks with some pieces of data are lost. So this can be done in two ways. First, the data can just be copied across the cluster to some other nodes. Like 3 copies exist on three physical servers. This is the traditional approach that we have now. Another method that lets service providers save on much disk space is erasure coding, which is a typical method used, for example, in RAID 6-like technologies, which means that a group of pieces of data is taken, then certain checksums are calculated based on these pieces of data, And these checksums are then distributed onto other servers of the cluster. And in case again of losing one or two servers, the data can be reconstructed based on those checksums. This means that instead of having 200% overhead for storage, like in replication, we will have around 30% of overhead of storage, well, which is much better, of course. Now, storage is then exported in some form to storage consumers. We have 4 ways of exporting that storage. First, we are exporting it as block devices. These block devices are mainly used as containers or virtual machines, virtual disks. So this is the most typical case. It can also be exported as a nice SCSI block device. Then it is possible to use virtual storage in combination with other virtualization technologies. Well, let's say Hyper-V, for example. Virtual storage can be exported as an NFS share, so in the form of files, or as an SMB share, which is a marginal use case, but is possible. It can be exported as an S3 compatible storage, which is vital for today's web applications. This S3 method is fully compatible with Amazon S3 API. And it is also possible to export our storage as Docker volumes, so persistent Docker volumes. I will talk about it a bit later. On top of that sits a management interface for storage. So the web management interface that is mentioned here is not fully developed yet. It will be released this year. For the time being, it is in the beta stage, and storage is manageable via command line. So key features here, especially in comparison with Virtuozzo 6. The newer kernel, that goes without saying. The new hypervisor. In Virtuozzo 6, we had our own hypervisor for virtual machines. Now we have switched to the industry standard KVM. The new memory management system that now allows the users, for example, to decrease the memory given to a virtual machine. It was not possible before, and it is not easily doable in other virtualization solutions. Let me open the chat window quickly. Is Ready Kernel standard integrated, or is it sold as an add-on? If you use the commercial Virtuozzo 7 solution, Ready Kernel is a free standard feature with Virtuozzo. If you don't use Virtuozzo 7 as a solution that you have purchased in some way, then Ready Kernel is available for separate purchase. So live migration, interesting here is that previously we used the migration was done in the kernel, and in case the kernels were not fully compatible between the physical servers. For example, some CPU had different characteristics on the destination server. Live migration could not be possible. Now the migration is done only in user space. I'm talking about containers here, not about virtual machines. And so it has become much more stable and reliable. Virtuozzo storage, key features. So our new things in Virtuozzo 7 are, as I said, S3 compatibility, persistent volumes for Docker, and RAID 6 like redundancy. It's worth mentioning here that our storage was specifically developed for virtualization use cases. So it is optimized performance-wise for storing virtual machines and container images. But for example, with S3, it is already no longer the case. S3 is renowned for being able to manage millions of small files with very good performance. How can you manage Virtuozzo 7? So Virtuozzo 7 is a virtualization product. Basically, the management is in the hands of service providers. They're free to choose whatever tool they consider more convenient. As I said, we are already integrated with OpenStack. So if a service provider is not afraid of deploying an OpenStack infrastructure in the data center, then Virtuozzo nodes can be added to OpenStack easily. There are simpler tools like a standard virtual machine manager can also be used. It is possible to develop one's own solutions for managing Virtuozzo, and as I said, we are exposing two API interfaces, libvirt and Virtuozzo SDK. Libvirt is preferable because we are concentrating on it. It is industry standard, and it is likely that in the next version of Virtuozzo, our own SDK will be dropped. Not dropped yet, but quite possible that it will happen. And we are working on developing our own management interface. Those of you who have used the previous versions of Virtuozzo know it already. It was called previously Perl's Virtual Automation, or PVA. So now we have rebranded it to simply Virtuozzo Automator. It is yet being developed for Virtuozzo 7, and it will be available sometime this year, so before New Year, certainly, likely in November. Then those who use 12 solutions will be able to use it. What can a service provider offer on top of Virtuozzo 7? Now let us talk about some typical use cases. The most typical use case is, of course, web hosting. Containers and virtual machines sold as VPSs. Now Linux is very much widespread in web hosting. It doesn't lose its crown to Windows and is not going to. So in case of Linux web hosting, our system containers is what the service provider needs. Because of their much lower overhead, it is possible to squeeze many more Linux environments onto a physical server and thus be much more profitable than if a service provider had to deal with only virtual machines. As I said, containers are fully isolated from each other. They are fully secure. They are in no way worse than virtual machines. It is possible to fine-tune their resources. If some container misbehaves, overloads the server with I/O or with CPU power, it is possible to limit its resources to the desired level. It is also possible to limit them beforehand and make separate offers based on how much resources you are giving to end users. I/O is especially important. CPU disk, well, they are more or less standard. I/O can be can make a difference. Here is the illustration, just how much more containers are possible on a physical node in comparison to virtual machines. This test is about bringing up multiple virtual machines and then containers having a Drupal content management system inside, and then measuring the response time from this CMS. So with KVM, after 130 virtual machines, so the response time becomes unacceptable. With containers, only after 210 containers. So you can calculate yourself how much more profitable containers can be. Customers, of course, ask for Windows as well as the hosting server. Here, hypervisor can be used, and the virtual machine can be brought up. How are we different from Red Hat KVM, for example, just from standard KVM? With KVM, we have taken the standard KVM and worked specifically on optimizing the Windows performance inside this KVM. In a recent KVM conference, we gave a talk just giving technical details about what we did. It's not customizing the KVM. We have taken the standard KVM and built our optimizations on top. This means that we are 100% compatible with standard KVM. We can take a Virtuozzo virtual machine and move it to a Red Hat KVM host, and it will be runnable there, but with less performance. Or we can do the other way around. We can take a Red Hat KVM and move it to Virtuozzo host and run it with better performance there. And here's a graphic that illustrates just our measurements about standard CentOS KVM and Virtuozzo KVM. This test is called vConsolidate, the test developed by Intel. It takes a certain amount of workloads. A workload is a group of applications running as a whole, and measures the performance of these applications based on, again, how many of these workloads we are running inside a VM. So the best performance is at 5 workloads, but everywhere we are about 30%. We have about 30% better score than standard KVM. Virtual data center is, of course, what many providers offer nowadays. Virtuozzo itself does not have virtual data center capabilities, but we allow to use them with the help of management tools like OpenStack. So thanks to our integration with OpenStack, we are now open to all Virtuozzo data center capabilities that it offers, like load balancer, net firewall, VPN access control lists, and whatnot. So you're welcome to use Virtuozzo in OpenStack. It is possible not only to sell just containers, just virtual machines, so vanilla, pristine VPSs. It is possible to sell applications packed or packaged as a VPS. In this way, the provider is able to target specific verticals, or the provider is able to charge additionally for some kind of applications that they sell. So to make this possible, we have partnered with a third-party company called Bitnami, whose business is exactly packaging most popular open source applications for different virtualization solutions. So they do it not only for us, for all virtualization vendors, and they do it now for us. They package applications both in the form of containers and of virtual machines. All their applications are select. So they selected carefully, take only the most popular ones. So now there are about 130 such applications. They do a very good job of releasing timely updates for those applications with all security patches, etc. So the provider doesn't have to worry about a VPS template being insecure, for example. So Virtuozzo and Bitnami take care of this. So that's a pretty useful tool. Object storage is already possible, though it is marked as beta now, but the release is around the corner. It will happen in November, I think. Object storage now is required by many web applications that deal with millions of files. So for a usual file-based storage, the performance becomes very bad when an application deals with million files. So for this kind of things, object storage is used. Object storage is built on top of Virtuozzo storage. So not simply on Virtuozzo, but a service provider has to use our Virtuozzo storage. thus use all the advantages that it gives, like high availability, flexibility, etc. And on top of this, it is possible to offer object storage to the customers with the advantages of object storage already. So the major one is performance. And well, this forms a unified solution, S3 compatible solution. Docker. Of course, a service provider wants to ride on the wave of Docker popularity. And a service provider should be ready to answer end users' requests about Docker hosting. Docker is made much more attractive and profitable in Virtuozzo in two ways. So first, which I have mentioned already, is persistent volumes for Docker. Persistent volumes are made in the form of disk images that we use for containers, for containers and virtual machines as well. But we have developed a special volume driver, Docker volume driver, which is already available in the Docker driver catalog, so freely available. It is possible to use this driver to create persistent volumes that will have all the advantages of storage again. So it is possible to create a volume that spans beyond the capacity of a single server, a volume that is highly available and you don't lose it if you lose a server, a volume that is migratable from server to server, and a volume that just is not destroyed when a Docker container using it is destroyed. So this is one way how we integrate Docker. The other way is the ability to run Docker infrastructure inside our containers. When a service provider offers Docker to end users, usually they don't give the entire physical server to the end user. Often, so basically always, almost always, Docker is installed inside a virtual machine. And inside this virtual machine, well, the user can do whatever they want with Docker. So we have made it possible to run Docker not only inside a virtual machine, but inside a container. So it's like container in a container approach. But remember, ours is a system container and Docker is an application container. And if you, if a service provider gives a container with Docker inside to the end user, again, it is possible to have many more containers on a single host. So the margin is much higher here. So these are two ways how Docker can be integrated with Virtuozzo. Virtuozzo Linux is our operating system that we use for our solutions. Of course, it's an underlying system for everything that we have, but it is also possible to have it as a standalone Linux distribution, either for the provider themselves or for an end user. So for the provider, it might make sense if the provider wants to have professional support, for example, and they want to have an operating system fully compatible with CentOS system. So it's like Red Hat, but with our support. It is specifically optimized for running virtualization workloads. Ready kernel subscription is included, as it is written here. It also makes sense to give this operating system as an offer to end users, because if an end user becomes Virtuozzo Linux, then they will get support from us, not from the provider. So it will save the provider some costs. It is possible to resell Virtuozzo Linux licenses and also to get one's margin. So Virtuozzo Linux can be run as it is on the physical host or inside a virtual machine or inside a container. So it's just a VPS template. We're becoming a bit too specific So those were offers, general offers that we have. Now some specific services with these offers. Ready kernel. Ready kernel is our technology based on the kernel K-patch technology. As I said, the main use case is being able to apply security patches to the kernel without rebooting, and thus to have much greater uptimes for end containers and virtual machines. If, as I said, if you use Virtuozzo 7, Ready kernel is included for free, so to speak. If you don't use Virtuozzo 7, it is possible to purchase it separately, not right now. So Ready kernel as a standalone product is not yet released, but it's going to be released. So the current date is 8th of November. Well, can slip a bit, but anyway, it is pretty soon already. This will be supported on a limited set of operating systems initially, but in future we'll be adding more distributions, and any Red Hat-based Linux will be supported for Ready kernel. Online memory management can be an addition to a current offer. As I said, so the main thing that we have added in Virtuozzo 7 is the ability to decrease the memory of a running VM without rebooting it, which was not possible and not easy nowadays. This gives a service provider the possibility to offer pay-as-you-go, or pay-as-you-go, I would say, models to end users, depending on workloads. So a user can increase the memory for their current workload, then decrease it when the workload has been completed in order to save on this. So it is possible to create the corresponding billing plans that accommodate this. In particular, this capability will be in the next release of Odin automation for cloud infrastructure, which is not a Virtuozzo company, but a company that offers Virtuozzo for end users. Not only RAM is supported, virtual CPU, hot plug, and yeah, that's it. Disk encryption is a feature that has been required by some of Virtuozzo partners. It is intended specifically for those users who want to be absolutely sure that their data can be compromised. Well, of course, no one can give a 100% guarantee. So, but with disk encryption, there is only one way how an evildoer can get hold of sensitive data. First, they need to get hold of the disk, of the physical disk, where containers virtual disk is stored, and they need to get hold also of the key management system of the provider. So only if both these things get into the hands of a malicious person, then the contents of the disk can be decrypted. But of course, the probability is much lower than with unencrypted disks, because then it will only be needed to get the physical disk itself and, well, get access to all the data stored in the virtual disk. So disk encryption is intended to be used with an external key management system that the provider has, and can be well integrated pretty easily with this key management system. It's only writing a simple script for communicating with the key management system. Backup and restore are available only in the commercial version of Virtuozzo. So Virtuozzo is open source. Maybe I haven't mentioned it already, but Virtuozzo is open source. It is possible to download it and run almost everything without paying anything. But some features are available only in commercial version. Backup and restore is one of those features. We use, so for our backups, we use the standard Q copy and write to format. So it is possible to restore a backup even on a non-Virtuozzo node because it's standard format. We use snapshots to create our backups. So basically, we freeze the state of the container at a certain moment of time and copy it to a backup location. We also use incremental backups by default. So not only it is not necessary to back up the whole container of virtual machines, but just the changed blocks of data in the disk image. Okay, this is backup and restore. How to start? Maybe here I will give the floor again to Peter. Peter, if you will, you can talk about the final slides. Will you?
Yep, sure. So thanks, Vadim. I appreciate that. And so, as Vadim mentioned, I think it's a lot to digest, but certainly we have a lot of resources at your disposal. You can certainly try Virtuozzo 7. There's a link here in the webinar, and we can also certainly share the link with everyone via email. You can also give Virtuozzo storage a try via our beta and Docker as well. And you know, we've been incredibly active over the last few months as we've released Virtuozzo 7 on social media, and you know, have blogs about the products as well as white papers and things that are available to you. And as Vadim is the technical contact, I am the sales contact, so can certainly work with the Openprovider team on pricing and total cost of ownership documents and any competitive analysis that you guys may be looking for. You know, Virtuozzo in the past has had a fairly complicated pricing model. What we've tried to do is simplify that. We have really looked at it from a perspective of CPU when it comes to the compute and virtualization layer, as well as container and VM. But you know, really, instead of having many different SKUs out there, we've really leveled it off to about four SKUs, low density, medium density, and high density, and then there's also a SKU for just one container or VM. We do have a lease license model that revolves around a subscription basis, but also perpetual licensing is a capability that we have in other circumstances as well. As I said before, we're here to help in any way that we can and respond as best we can to any questions or commentary that you have. Okay, so I'll thank you here, and please feel free to contact us or discuss with Openprovider. Thanks again. Have a good day.